Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Spoiler alert. Why didn't Daenerys Targaryen's devoted dragon Drogon attack Jon Snow in retribution after Jon Snow killed her in the Game of Thrones finale? After being established as one of the two primary heroes, Daenerys was darkly transformed into the Mad Queen in the final episodes of Game of Thrones, a dramatic transformation that was heavily condemned for the way it was portrayed. All of this culminated in Dany's devastating devastation of King's Landing. From her perch atop Drogon in Game of Thrones, she burned most of the city down, murdering many innocent people in her quest for power and vengeance against Cersei Lannister. Sadly, it was all for nothing because Daenerys Targaryen, the Mad Queen of Game of Thrones, was never allowed to occupy the Iron Throne in the first place. There were differing opinions regarding the intelligence of the dragons in Westeros prior to the events of the prequel, House of the Dragon. How much of the actions of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion were determined by themselves was unknown. Jon Snow's sparing by Drogon seems inconsistent with how many fans at the time saw the dragon's comprehension of the situation or capacity for deliberative decision-making. Daenerys demonstrates expert control over her dragons throughout Game of Thrones, and she uses them only to vent her rage. It would only make sense that Drogon from Game of Thrones would flash his fangs in defense of Jon Snow and roast him to a crisp following Daenerys' demise. Audiences are well aware that this is untrue, though. Rather, Drogon screams in pain before destroying the Iron Throne all the way down to the stairs. Daenerys is picked up by Drogon, who then transports her body to the east. So why did Drogon not murder Jon Snow in the final scene of Game of Thrones? Theories on why Drogon didn't kill Jon Snow. There's no rule that states dragons won't kill Targaryens. In fact, numerous dragon attacks occurred during the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war that is portrayed in the Game of Thrones spin-off series House of the Dragon. However, Jon Snow's survival was probably aided by his blood, and more significantly, by his relationship with Daenerys and Drogon. Before Daenerys died, Drogon from Game of Thrones was aware that she and Jon were in love. However, he personally showed that he had total faith in Jon Snow by lowering his guard in front of him on Dragonstone. Even though Drogon is aware that Jon killed Daenerys despite being her lover, it is clear from the circumstances that Jon did not act maliciously. There is no joy or sense of accomplishment on Jon Snow's part. The fact that Drogon from Game of Thrones appears to sense Daenerys' death and that they have a strong bond, which explains how he knew to save her in Myreen's fighting pit as well, suggests that he comprehends the events of the past, the motivations behind Jon Snow's actions, and the reasons he chooses not to kill him. Though dragons are sophisticated, clever animals, if that gives Drogon too much credit, it may also be seen from the more straightforward perspective that, to put it simply, he trusts Jon and has no reason to hurt him. After all, Daenerys dragons in the Game of Thrones put a great deal of faith in Jon Snow. In Eastwatch, the 5th episode of Season 7 of Game of Thrones, Jon Snow is able to pet Drogon without getting burned to a char. Even more impressively, Jon Snow rode Rhaegal, something the dragon from Game of Thrones would never have allowed without a great deal of trust. The real reason for the Game of Thrones finale, why Drogon didn't kill Jon Snow in the season finale of Game of Thrones, Drogon sees Daenerys' death. The Drogon from Game of Thrones released all of his rage and agony in a spectacular flash of fire when he learned of Daenerys' passing. Though many might have assumed he would go for Jon Snow, even Jon, who seems to be expecting an attack, the screenplay for the episode states that he prepares to die. Drogon instead directs his scorching stare toward the Iron Throne, melting it completely. Even though the murderer was Jon Snow, for several reasons, Drogon decides not to kill him in retaliation. Though it's uncertain, it seems likely that Drogon knows Jon killed Daenerys. After all, he's the only other person present. The dragon appears to be aware that Jon is a person Daenerys' mother loved, and that he is ultimately not to blame for Daenerys' death. The screenplay for the climax states that Drogon wants to burn the world, but he will not kill Jon. Another question is whether or not Drogon from Game of Thrones truly understood what the Iron Throne stood for. The script implies that it is not the target of Drogon's wrath, but David Benioff's statement in the DVD commentary for The Iron Throne contradicts this. The latter seems more plausible and less like a simplified interpretation because Drogon from Game of Thrones felt a strong bond with her and even wept for Daenerys' passing, and thus, in a sense, understood at least part of her feelings and ideas. That way, he would have known that she was corrupted by the seed of power and that she loved Jon Snow all the way to the end, meaning Jon Snow didn't deserve to die for killing her in the final scene of Game of Thrones. Daenerys' passing is one of the main factors that caused viewers of Game of Thrones to disagree with the show's conclusion. Although Jon Snow's passion for Daenerys was evident, he ultimately realized that Daenerys' death would be better for the kingdom as a whole. Because of his Targaryen ancestry, his love for Daenerys, and perhaps even the knowledge that, despite Jon's actions, he wasn't the reason behind behind Daenerys' demise at the end of Game of Thrones. Drogon from the television series decided not to murder Jon Snow. In Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, dragons were proven to be essentially intelligent. In the concluding episode of Game of Thrones, The Iron Throne, just as Dany was about to receive what she had long desired, Jon Snow understood what a deadly dictator she had become and killed her. In the last scene of Game of Thrones, Drogon's apparent sentience in choosing to save Jon Snow from harm felt startling, almost like a major plot hole. But more of these fire-breathing monsters have appeared on TV thanks to the spin-off series House of the Dragon, which has also helped to explain a lot of their behavior. Consequently, Jon Snow's sparing by Drogon makes much more sense in the context of HOTD. The House of the Dragon has a lot to do with dragons. Their treatment of individuals who are not born with a dragon is a sign of their position within the Targaryen clan, and they have demonstrated a high level of intelligence. Consider the circumstances surrounding Lena Valerion's passing. She begged her dragon, Vhagar, to kill her, but at the last minute, the beast refused. The complexities of dragons' training, brains, and decisions are considerably more thoroughly examined in House of the Dragon, proving that they are more intelligent than the television series Game of Thrones suggested. Even though Drogon's decision to spare Jon Snow seemed strange during the recent airing of Season 8 of Game of Thrones, it now seems far less shocking in light of the additional context provided by House of the Dragon. Although Drogon's precise motivations for sparing Jon Snow remain a mystery, it is undeniable that he possesses the knowledge and discernment necessary to make such choices, at least for the time being.